some of them.
So, Panzer, I'm like Mercedes, the company Mercedes existed during World War II. Are they the main company that handled everything from commercial to military? Because,
I think that the parent company, Mercedes, was the automotive branch of Daimler-Benz.
okay.
Daimler-Benz was kind of like the headquarter, whether they did aviation, marine, automotive, you know. So, yeah.
Okay.
So Mercedes is like the automotive branch.
Yeah, till this day, their technology, except for the scandal they had a couple years back, was it them? I think it was them, right? Where they kind of like took something, shortcutted something, they
Was
got
it
in trouble.
Volkswagen?
Oh, yeah, I think that might be it.
Something with the emissions.
Yeah.
They kind of faked emission results.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But other than that, with everything, you know, in the past happened, but you can't deny that their technology was. How is it that their technology, as far as automotive wise, is so much more advanced than US? Is it because they're they're kind of like ignoring the cost as long as we provide a good quality compared to the market and commercial wise in US? It's kind of like Sherman tanks, mass produce, mass produce, mass produce, quicker, quicker, quicker. Is it?
I'm not sure. It's probably rooted in kind of the European traditions. The U.S. was always blessed with plenty
Oh, resources, yeah.
raw resources and raw material. So your cars tend to be much bigger, your roads are much bigger. Whereas probably in Europe, you could not afford as many of these things, so things had to last
Longer.
So
That would
you
make
kind
sense.
of put a lot into your engineering to make sure that your motorcycles, bicycles, cars, you know, what have you, last for a longer time.
That would make sense. You know, now that you mention it, that would make perfect sense. So during World War II, is there a reason why time limit to mass produce, no matter if the armor's small, thinner, as long as we can produce those kind of tanks out in the field right away? Is that the main logistical? Even the planes, the armor plating on the planes, seems to be the U.S. are very fast producing planes in World War II, but it seems like armor plating is a factor. Kind of like with the Fortress. Kind of like, according to the old veterans in the documentary, it's kind of like when the bullet hits a plane, it's kind of like paper, like cuts it like butter.
Well, you know, as far as that, you know, on an airplane, you've got restrictions because it has to fly. So
Yeah.
you can't make it too heavy.
True.
If you put, you know, armor on the plane, you know,
It'll slow down, or you barely fly at all.
sure. Plus, you have to get her off the ground. It has to carry more fuel, weight. So it's difficult. Most planes are built for aerodynamic loads. Okay, but as far as them being hit and being able to survive a lot of damage, that's a question. Now, Germany was hell bent on basically conquering all of Europe.
Are they also trying to conquer the Americas after Europe?
I think they had plans. I'm not quite sure they really understood how powerful the U.S. could really be.
Oh, yeah.
Were. But I think that Hitler probably had plans because of their disdain. You know, we were not the chosen or the master race.
Although he should have seen what happened with his Russian campaign. Kind of like what the logical, I think the strategical event with Alexander the Great. He expanded all the way to Asia. I think the more you expand, the less resources your men can, you know, replenish to the point where you lose a campaign. I don't think, even to this day, it seems like now, I don't want to mention certain countries, but there are certain countries out there kind of like playing the part of conqueror once again. I just don't understand what's the logic end game. Like, there's no way you can conquer the entire world. There's no actual way. So is it resources, territory, or influence? It's hard to grasp.
I think it's hard. You never really know what's in the mind of a megalomaniac. You know, someone that says, yeah, we're going to conquer the world.
Okay. All right.
I think if you have that mindset, you're severely underestimating what others are going to say, no, wait a second, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You're not
Yeah,
gonna
every
stand
day
for
at
it.
the museum, that's played.
So is the reason why Hitler targeted American, the nation itself, because America joined the war? But if we didn't join the war, will he leave U.S. alone? Because Churchill was like, "Hey, come and help us, whatnot."
Well, yeah. I mean, Great Britain was the only one that was basically standing up
Yeah.
to Nazi Germany.
What's the turning point that convinced the president to join?
I'm not quite sure if they had a clear plan to conquer. I suspect that their belief was that we were just not going to get involved because of our isolationist policy. Back in those days, I think after World War I, the United States probably just wanted to be by itself, kind of not mess with the Europeans and all of their problems.
Yeah, we have.
So as a result, it was probably kind of unusual. Hitler said, "Well, that's okay, those Americans, just leave them alone, they don't bother." And we, at least at first, were kind of saying, we don't want to mess with Europe. Let them take care of that kind of stuff.
Well, it's
And then, of course, Churchill
sometimes
got
you
to
go
be very
so
friendly
much to
with
see,
FDR.
so much to read, you get kind of.
And obviously,
And this is
Great
smaller,
Britain was the only one
because this is
basically
all
standing up to the Nazis.
Yeah.
And they needed help.
Would you say that the reason why the U.S. decided to really join in because what happened with Pearl Harbor, or is Japan attacking Pearl Harbor due to the fact America joined in? Because that time they barely made the decision to join in World War II before Pearl Harbor, correct?
Yeah. I'll make sure there's a bunch
Yeah,
out there.
I think there was
leave.
a question with Japan in their expansion.
Yeah.
Who basically wanted to
I'll
be
make
able
sure
to
there's a
control all of the Pacific, the maritime, all of the trade routes and that. Now, I think that the U.S. really pushed Japan's button when at one time we cut off their oil supply.
Okay.
In the 20s and 30s, I think that Japan, not having that many resources, they were actually importing a lot of oil, if not most of it, from the U.S. And to curtail the Japanese expansion, if I remember the history correctly, FDR actually put an embargo and said, okay, no oil. Well, that's what kind of drove Imperial Japan to say, okay, you can't do that. We need the oil to continue the expansion. And I think that their attack on Pearl Harbor was probably meant to be just kind of like a warning to say, look, we are the power in the Pacific, not you. So we're going to continue to with our expansion. And then it kind of escalated from that. It became a viable, I can't say an excuse, but it became a viable provocation for actually entering into it.
Okay, gotcha.
And being since they had the Nazi and Imperial Japan axis, then Hitler declared war on the United States, which he really didn't have to do.
Yeah.
By the way. But he decided to do that, and then it was just kind of like, fine, then we are in.
In your humble opinion, if U.S. didn't join in the war, would UK and Russia be able to stand on their own, or will they collapse? Because Russia's also a pretty big nation, although their quality of armament is, not as up par to U.S.
Like you said, in my humble opinion, I think Russia had more resources than the UK to kind of stand up to Turkey. Although, with the Battle of Britain, I mean, they were right there. I mean, they stopped the Luftwaffe in the invasion. So I think it was a pretty credible, enough strength there. But Russia certainly, I mean, with so many more people and much more. Yeah. They could have handled it by themselves.
Wow, I wonder. It's just like there's a lot of things in here that kind of like give you the appreciation of the modern time. Like slight deviation or slight change, we might not be where we are right now. Kind of like what happened in Midway, with the mistake in Pearl Harbor. If that was completely ignored.
It's amazing, kind of in a way, how faith or luck kind of favored, the Allied, like on the D-Day invasion. the timing and everything. And Rommel was away, from the Normandy there. The thing about Hitler that, you couldn't wake him up before 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, things like that. And probably his people were already telling him, hey, they're really invading Normandy. And so, well, no, it's okay, just a fake. So yeah, a lot of things also went our way, if you will, to favor the ultimate outcome. Yeah.
True. But it was very costly. Like landing of D-Day itself. I mean, like when you see the documentary, the footage, it's a bloodbath. It's a bloodbath.
It's amazing that it came off as a success.
But yeah.
Because obviously, the Germans they had the weapons, they had the troops and everything to basically fight us off.
Now that you brought that up, the D-Day, it clicked in my mind where what happened with General Lee and Custer versus General I forgot his name. I'm blanking right now. He was appointed by Lincoln. I forgot. He was a vice president, but at one point he became Grant.
Jackson or Grant? Yeah, Grant.
You remember the Battle of what was it? Gettysburg. There was it. Where you were in the high point. General Lee was telling his generals, get the high point because it's going to be a bloodbath if we go to the valley. That's what happened with D-Day. They have the pillboxes on top of the beach shore. So different time period, but the same concept.
Kind of the same circumstance.
Yeah.
I guess.
There's no way but to charge your men forward because they already have the high ground.
Typically, right, the high ground is the one that you kind of strategically, I guess, that you favor.
So we're standing beside this American Airlines. Was this part also? Is this commercial or was this also part of the war era?
This is actually the oldest airplane we have in the collection. Here. It
Okay.
was built in 1942 from the Douglas plant in, I believe, El Segundo. Came off the assembly line as a C-47, as a cargo airplane.
Okay.
And it actually dropped paratroopers behind German lines at D-Day. It made it through the war intact. It was brought back. Someone from Canada purchased it, and they converted it to the passenger carrier configuration.
Okay.
Now, the story is this. It never actually flew for American Airlines. That's because General Lyon, who was the founder of the museum and the owner of all these items, he was on the board of directors of American Airlines. And as a tribute, he asked for permission to have this one painted as a flagship of American Airlines. So
Nice.
that's why you see it as a flagship. It actually never flew
Under American Airlines.
for American Airlines. It wasn't in passenger service up in Canada. It's one of the tourist and the airlines and stuff. But it was not an American Airlines airplane.
Okay. I think I also saw a version where women pilots were trained secretly to fly planes to drop off troops. Is that accurate? There's a word for that.
I'm not quite sure. I know the WASPs.
There you go.
Auxiliary. But their main service was to take the airplanes from the factories out to the actual front lines. The men were involved in the combat missions, so in order to spare that manpower, the women were entrusted with ferrying the airplanes from the factories. The B-17s, B-24s, the Mustangs, they flew every kind of airplane, actually from the factories to the actual initial flights. And it was amazing. I've read some stories where there's this little 5'2"
Lady.
lady gets out of a B-29, okay, and turns it over to the guys.
And just during the war, oh my goodness, bravo to those women.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What they did was totally unselfish. There was no pay
Yep.
for them. If something happened to them, and unfortunately there were fatalities,
Yeah.
the family had to cover the cost of the funeral and all that. And it wasn't until I think the Obama era where they actually had a congressional medal, kind of recognize the government recognizing their contribution.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I would have never known about it till I saw this segment while we were on vacation in Vegas. They did a little segment about the Wasp. I wasn't even aware they existed. I wasn't even aware. So when they're transferring this from U.S. directly to Europe, from United States to Europe, the front lines, or hopping?
Yeah, they had routes, like they would go through like in New England and then fly over to Greenland. Some were flown from the South American route. You know, it kind of everybody got pitched in, and I mean, you probably know that over 300,000 airplanes were produced from the U.S.
Yeah.
1941 to 1945.
There's a lot of
Just
planes.
an amazing effort.
True. So the Wasp women that flew the planes itself, were they, as you mentioned, they were flying planes like this size, but are they trained military maneuvers if something they encountered during the flight? Are they protected by fighters or? Whoa! They weren't protected by fighters? Oh my goodness.
No, it was just basically a transport.
Oh my goodness.
They would fly from here to wherever the bases were, sometimes by themselves.
Oh my. So they're actually have 90% chance of being shot down right away, or 100% chance of being shot down right away.
Well, a lot of also the delivery routes were here in the U.S.
Okay.
From the factory to, let's say, the training fields in Louisiana, back east. So a lot of the flying was done inside the United States, so there was no danger of
Okay.
fighters.
Okay, gotcha,
Some of
gotcha.
them that had to fly the stuff to Europe. Yeah, they got close to where the action really was.
I bet. This one's. What can you tell me a little bit more about the motorcycle? So this design per se, are they specifically by Germans?
Yeah, this is a Zundap, model, and this is the Africa Core insignia, if you will. You can tell by the tan color, also for the desert, that camouflage. Basically, they had two, the Zundap and BMW.
Okay.
Now, I've read that the German army, the Wehrmacht, actually preferred the mechanicals of the Zundap, reliability or what have you. But as a political contest, BMW went out, so they became kind of the favored supplier, relying on some of the Zundap technology to manufacture their motorcycles for the German army.
Gotcha.
And you'll see that different. This is a pretty basic, simple motorcycle. The sidecar is just kind of an attachment. If you take a look at the BMW,
Oh, the one back there?
R75, you'll see that the outer wheel of the sidecar is powered. There's an extra axle that has. So that's kind of like a little bit interesting,
Yeah.
more technological than your plain motorcycle.
Was this deployed as a fast-hitting assault unit, or was this mainly transporting?
Actually, for both. On some of them, I think on the BMW, you can see that there's like a little machine gun mount where they could put a rifle on there. But this was kind of like their communication utility vehicle.
Okay.
Multi-purpose. kind of thing. Not as good as adaptable as our Jeep, but they had a multitude of these, kind of tricycles or motorcycles with the sidecar.
Amazing. And this one are not replicas. This is original, correct?
I think a lot of the survivors, you find that it's a combination of some original parts and then some
Restoration.
restoration kind of.
Okay.
It's pretty hard to actually trace everything and have like a like today the numbers matching term is pretty popular. I'm not so sure that it's the case on all of these.
Gotcha. So do you usually get packed tourists come here at the museum itself?
Do we get what?
Packed people come here like daily basis. They come and tour like.
Sure. I mean, the museum is open, 7 days a week, and so we have visitors that come either, once someone is interested in the history of tours. We have a lot of senior citizen tours. We also have a school program, a very active school program with the Newport Mesa School District,
Okay.
where we get kids that come in escorted by their teachers, and they learn a little bit about World War II.
Oh, that's good. At least they're updated in history. History, not just in the class, they're actually seeing it.
Yeah, what works is they're actually kind of hands-on. You know, all of the first one, there's one right there. You can actually see it.
Hopefully they're not like yanking on stuff.
Well, yes, that's why we're here as docents, sometimes also to keep track of people don't get carried away and
Yep.
start jumping on things. It happens sometimes.
Wow, I'm amazed how complete your museum is. I'm like, this one, I wasn't expecting to see this one.
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting little piece. And a lot of times you see it as a tow vehicle for like the German jets, for the Me-262. Their engines were not very reliable. They also had a fuel shortage. So in order to save gas so that the airplane didn't have to taxi by itself, they would tow it
Oh,
to its actual, takeoff position. And this was basically a tow tug. but they also use it in the field, again, as a communication supply type equipment vehicle.
so the driver is going to be here and the gunners will be here?
Yeah, you've got the driver in there, and actually you drive it just like a motorcycle. The handlebars are connected to the clutches. So just like on a tank, you kind of put the brake on one side and you can turn it, that way. And there's room back here for 2 or 3. They can put their rifle, or whatever up in here, and you could tow, I guess, different size, things in the back for like food, cable, ammunition, gas, whatever the supplies were.
Man, you don't have to worry about balance though. That's right. It's like a tricycle.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, kind of now after the war, it turns out that these things were loved by farmers because they were a great farm implement.
Oh yeah, I can see.
Kind of like a tractor. You put a plow or whatever behind, and you could just go ahead and.
Is this a working model?
We found that one of the gas tanks was leaking, so we emptied it out. So this one hasn't worked in quite a while.
Okay. Because from the color, it kind of looked like one of those things where they just make it look like it was fully functional at one point, but it's only a display.
Other than that, it has the engine is inside here. Other than that, the museum prides itself with basically the originality. And most of the airplanes here are flight worthy.
Oh, nice.
In fact, on the B-25, the one there, we're trying to get it ready for the Chino Air Show
Oh, this one.
coming up in May. Yeah.
Oh. The B-25, wow.
The B-25 Mitchell, the medium twin-engine, bomber.
Now that I've turned my head, I just saw this guy right here.
Yeah.
1943 Japanese Rikyu sidecar motorcycle.
Yeah, copy of a Harley Davidson. Yeah.
Look at that compartment they have. It's much more wider than what the German had.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of surprised when I first saw it, especially with Japanese people at that time, not being too tall in stature.
Yeah.
This is kind of a big vehicle. And then I said, okay, if they copy the Harley Davidson, it would make sense that for the U.S. market, this thing would.
So that's.
It's quite a history. This is my goodness.
Yeah, and the Philippines copied this, the small one.
A smaller one. They jam people on it.
Sure.
Because they cannot put it as heavy.
I think this is the pride and joy of the American soldiers, the Jeep, the American Jeep.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because even in the Philippines, the big one, the big transport, it's still being used till this day. But yeah,
Well,
it's,
these things ended up all over the world. They built 650,000 or whatever the production was, and of course, they were all over the place. Europe, Asia, the whole Pacific, and a lot of them were just left. They were not. There's no sense in bringing everything back.
yeah.
Just left in place, and of course, the people could use something.
So what's the rule of thumb if you find a historical vehicle like this? Do you have rights to own it, or do you have to submit a petition to own it? Like you find it in the field, you restore it?
No, I guess basically if you find it, you had to buy it from if somebody, it's on your property. Thing. But as far as government type paper or something, no.
Okay.
They've been struck off the record long ago.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha.
It's anybody.
Yeah, because I keep finding this urban explorers on YouTube. They find abandoned military vehicles, both German and American, on the field, like in Europe, Asia. So some of them are actually collecting. Like there's this UK British guy restoring a Sherman tank, and he has a German Panzer tank, which is restoring it for years. So there's no. Is it legal wise? It's his property then.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Now, some countries have restrictions about flying, like the warplanes. I think Europe is much more strict than, let's say, in the U.S. Even though our Navy is the one where is the most problem, that it's always Navy property. So even though you and I know that, for instance, there's a Hellcat someplace offshore, yeah, we can go and dig it out, but the minute that it comes off, the Navy has claim to it.
Wow.
Whereas the Air Force, like, they have several B-29 other airplanes that are up in the Arctic. Once they've been struck off record, if you're crazy enough to go
To restore it,
and
yeah.
get it, fine, it's yours.
Wow. Is it because the Hellcat is much more rare? Or is there a reason why that's the case?
I think it's just kind of the tradition. As far
Okay.
as the Navy, I don't know if it goes back to funding. Back in the old days, the congressional funding, the Navy lays claim to whatever it had at one time. It's always Navy property.
Wow.
Different branches of the military have different traditions.
True, true.
It's what it comes down to.
True. Wow. And this fancy, gorgeous car right here, what can you tell me about the Speedster, Salon Speedster?
Well, since General Lyon is also very much interested in classic cars, I mean, he has in his collection 10 Duesenbergs. If you're a classic car collector and you get your hands on one Duesenberg, you already have status to know it. He's got 10 of them.
Wow.
So he's kind of collected classic cars of the era, different samples that are significant because a lot of them are convertibles, as you can see, and they're significant to the American automotive industry. Now this particular one, Auburn, Cord, and Duesenberg are probably the three most famous luxury type American cars. Ford, of course, everybody knows about Ford. It's very, very popular. But these are significant of the Roaring 20s and the early 30s.
Oh, the Great Gatsby days.
Great Gatsby.
Nice.
And these are pretty famous for having engines of great big size, not very powerful. This one, for instance, is a 12-cylinder engine. But the horsepower is only like 140, 150.
Oh.
But for luxury of the era, very, very smooth. If I could start this engine, you would not hear it run. I mean,
Whoa.
it's just so smooth. Okay, that was kind of the whole luxury.
Yeah.
And great
Man.
big styling, typical of the era with the flowing fender lines. You're not going to find an ounce of plastic. Everything here is honest to goodness metal.
Wow.
And obviously, you can tell they're very massive.
Oh, yeah.
Long wheelbase and,
It is one gorgeous automobile.
but they are, they absolutely are. Yeah, so he has quite a collection of like the classic Auburns, Duesenbergs, Packards, Lincolns. He's got a couple of 1930s Rolls Royces also.
Ooh. Ooh.
It's quite a prized collection. Yeah.
Wow. Just look at that.
Yeah, V12 engine.
Man.
Really amazing.
So having this back in the day, wouldn't you think like majority of that generation will pass it down to their grandkids or kids because it's, or no?
Yeah, I mean, typically the ownership of some of these vehicles back in the day, you would have had to have been someone quite wealthy and famous. Movie stars owned them. You would have to be a pretty wealthy physician, let's say. And so they would have stayed in the family because even then they were not your average Model
Car.
T or
Yep.
you didn't find too many people that had. So some of them were obviously well taken care of, kind of maybe handed down in the family, or just well taken care of by the successive owners.
Yeah.
So that you still find them today in this great condition.
Oh yeah, definitely. In the Bay Area, there's whose grandparents that started the art university actually have a collection like these. Is this much more expensive versus this one, or are they basically
You mean like today, as far as collector value, or back in the day?
back in the day?
I think that the Duesenberg was probably the most expensive car where you could buy the chassis basically for around between $12,000 and $20,000. Now that's before the Great Depression. So, and then if you wanted to customize the body, the configuration, 2-door, 4-door, put a canvas top on it or have a feature, then you could custom order from a coach builder. So some people were putting out $30,000 to $40,000 in like 1930s era.
That's a lot of money.
Which today would at least be, I don't know, in the millions, I guess.
So what happened with that lifestyle? I mean, like, is it the more modernized car got out, the luxury cars like the previous vintage ones like this guys get pushed aside?
Sure. I mean, the automobile became more and more popular, more and more people could afford. Obviously, if a Ford Model T could be had for $400 or $500, that's what your average worker would be able to afford.
Yeah.
Not a $30,000.
Yep. Because they showed a lot of classic films like black and white, like like you said, like Great Gatsby days. You see a lot of these things, and majority of the drivers, I don't think they're, up very rich, but some of them are upper working class maybe or middle class. But these things are almost everywhere in every historical film you watch. So I was thinking, is this a common man's car, or is this a working man's car? Is this a rich man's car?
This is definitely an upper class, famous movie stars.
Oh, okay.
Movie studio people. Yeah, it was not, and their production numbers are very, very limited.
Okay.
I mean, whereas the Ford Model T, they were cranking this thing out by the thousands. This, if you had a production run of a couple hundred, it was already pretty big deal.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So I think that's why also today they're very prized, because there's not that many. But the thing is, they're not very practical in the sense that there's like no air conditioning, like we tend to think of comfort today. You had to be pretty wealthy to afford somebody to look after it. It's not like today where we don't think about jumping in the car and going. You couldn't do that with this. I mean, your engines really have to be looked after. Look at windshield wipers, for instance. I mean, they're pretty thin kind of stuff, so everything was geared for show more than anything, more than actually practical.
Kind of like a gown and a gala for women. Like they only wear it when there's a special event. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not very practical. You don't go shopping at your local Costco, dressed in diamonds and suits.
Yep. Go walk around a shopping mall. Yeah, it's not very practical, like you said. Yeah. Man.
Yeah, this is 1929.
During those days, it's kind of like has a little romance to it. I'm like, the era-wise. Man, amazing. And this Douglas plane right here, was this used during World War II or World War?
The A-26 has a very long service life. World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam.
Okay, ooh.
The last active mission in Vietnam was like 1966 or 1967.
1966.
Yeah, very, very adaptable airplane to different missions. Each engine's a couple of thousand horsepower. So you can put radar, bombs, missiles, machine guns, surveillance, kind of thing. It could do several different missions. So it was useful in all those theaters.
But survivability, how often does this thing survive its mission? Like,
apparently pretty successful, even though it's a propeller kind of thing. In the Korean War, it was in night missions. That's why it was painted black.
yeah.
And apparently with the advent of radar, it could fly and see the enemy, but the enemy could not see it. So that increased its survivability.
Nice.
But then, of course, pretty much by the early 50s, the jets were already faster. Airplanes were already coming on service. So then the propeller airplanes began to lose a lot of their usefulness.
True. The proxy war, like when Russia was backing, a communist nation and America was backing allied nations, I'm surprised that since they're actually interacting in the warfare, that America and Russia never really headbutt directly. They just do it by proxy war, like backing this unit.
Well, yeah, because you could never really say that, okay, Russia's declared war on the United States, or that the United States declared war on Russia. You really can't do that. So you have you fight the battle in a smaller, kind of
theater, yeah. Kind of like when Russia was conquering Afghanistan and America trained the locals to fight Russia. So it's kind of like they're fighting each other, but not directly. So I'm surprised with the patience of both nations not going at it directly. But unlike with the World War II, when Germany invaded UK and Europe, America participated without having to go through the proxy war on the side. Like, okay, this is a threat, we got to deal with it right away. Japan is a threat, deal with it right away. But with Russia is also, and China, they're becoming a major threat with certain territories. But America has the patience to deal it with proxy wars, like right now what's going on with Iran. I believe Russia is supporting, Iran right now, correct?
But I guess it comes down to the same thing. You don't want to have a direct confrontation.
True.
Because then we're into World War III. That kind of thing. So it's kind of like a chess game.
Like who's going to give up first?
Little pieces instead of
the
entire chessboard.
True. So with this kind of plane back in the day, would you think the MiGs of Russia was the biggest threat versus this one? Like, are they?
Definitely. This was never meant as a fighter.
It's much more like surveillance slash.
It's more like a support, some bombing, exercise. Whereas the MiG-15 and the MiG-17, they were pretty much all-out interceptors and fighters.
True.
Even though this one was for a propeller airplane, they probably had a top speed of around 400 miles an hour.
Okay.
Which, not as fast as a near supersonic jet. Pretty much out there.
I'm impressed with your knowledge. Thank you very much. You've given me so much information about the planes and the history about it.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear.
I truly enjoyed it.
I like people that come here and are interested and know about, what they're looking at.
Because this place, like, if places like this, artifacts like this, kind of put me back, not physically, but gives me a pic what the era was like.
Yeah, sure.
Like, step in the shoes and kind of picture myself.
Yeah,
That's
it's a
the era.
bit of kind of a time warp, if you will. I think a lot of the people like to come here. As you know, Southern California was the hotbed of aeronautical. All the big airplane manufacturers were here. So you get a lot of people that are still in aerospace, and they come and they look at some of the old stuff, and they say, wow, that's really neat.
Oh, yeah.
Everything in here is pretty much 1930s technology, but it still kind of resonates with today's modern
Technology, yeah.
tools.
It gives you the appreciation, like, I'm not sure about the younger generation and how they see it, but to me it's like looking back at that date and timeline, seeing how advanced people were with their technology-wise, gives you appreciation about the the mental capacity of a person. The events, it's kind of like seeing a living being, but it's not a living being, but kind of like seeing a living history.
Yeah, and the thing is not just engines and things were made for show. I mean, these things worked.
Yeah.
I mean, they carried out successful missions. They were fighting a powerful enemy.
Yeah.
There were losses, sure, but they actually got the job done.
True. That's why it's kind of sad.
To their credit,
That's why it's kind of sad when sometimes there's not enough funding for things like this, and the government can like cramps it up. Like the in Bay Area called Vallejo. There's a line of ships. They call it mothball ships, and Iowa came from that area. It was saved by a nonprofit and transferred to LA. Thank God for groups like that, Because from what I've seen in documentaries, after the war, majority of the ships are scrap. Airplanes scrap, tanks scrap.
Well, I'm sure you've seen pictures of like Kingman, Arizona. I mean, as far as the eye can see, B-17s, B-24s, B-25s. That's it. Their useful military life was over. So at least they reclaimed all of the materials, and now probably we're driving around the cars, or I don't know, our pots and pans. Maybe there's some traces of the material from this stuff. Well, good. How did you find out about the museum? Was it something that you wanted to pursue, personal interest?
Personal interest. I targeted like museums like this in certain cities I go to, like Irvine. I was hoping that there's going to be a museum like this. I went to Atwater. They have a lot of fly fortresses. And I want to see what kind of units are here in Orange County.
Well, it's good. Good to see that there are people that are interested.
It's good to see that there's more organization keeping these things alive and preserved. Because once they're gone, they're gone.
That's it. Once you cut them up, that's it. Watch the lesson and fly.
So the museum only caters from the internal, or are there external planes also?
No, basically, now General Lion also owns Martin Aviation next door. It's a business that caters to the turboprops and some of the private airplanes.
Okay.
Here. But the museum itself is an entity by itself.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's privately owned. It has nothing to do with Orange County.
Oh, gotcha.